Welcome back to Born to Climb, and today's guest is Mike Ficara. He's an inspiring entrepreneur, a fractional COO, and is the author of Socks on a Rooster. Mike's story takes us from him struggling in school to becoming a powerhouse and helping businesses thrive. And in this episode, Mike shares his hard-earned lessons on embracing failure, harnessing fear, and building sustainable success. You're going to discover how to achieve more by actually doing less, how fear can be a powerful motivator, and why having a board of directors for your life might just be the game changer that you need. If you're a business owner or an entrepreneur or just someone looking for practical insights, then you don't want to miss this conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. And today I am with Mike Ficara. Mike, welcome to Born to Climb.
Oh, thank you so much, James, for having me on, and hello to everyone in the audience. Appreciate you guys listening.
So I was intrigued by part of your story when you told me that you failed the first grade. And so let's start there. How did that happen? And let's talk about the impact that had on your life.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about childhood memories. I think as I'm getting older, it's probably one of my first ones because I keep reliving it, But I remember my dad coming in and telling me, hey, what do you think about doing first grade again? It was over the summer. Can vividly remember, holding my stuffed animal Tafu, which I actually still have in my closet. And, my mom even said, oh, it's going to be a growing year for you. And I still kid around with her to this day. I'm 44. I'm like, I'm 5'5". That growing year thing really didn't work out. But I just wasn't a good student. I wasn't good academically. They actually wanted to hold me back in kindergarten. My parents were like, no. He'll figure it out. He'll figure it out. Then in first grade, they held me back. And education was always a struggle for me. And that was, like I said, my parents, I think, had my best interest in mind. But I also wasn't really putting in the effort there that I probably could have as well. But figured that out later in life,
Your parents sound like great parents in the fact that they reframed that for you.
Yeah. It's funny. It's one of those things where, as I've grown in my entrepreneurial career and different struggles, one of the things I could say is I had great parents, and sometimes you even hear other people's stories about, their parents were hard on them or they didn't have a mom or a dad there, or whatever it is. I'm like, I wonder if I would have been better if that happened to me, but thank God it didn't, right? It was always one of my fears. But yeah, I had great parents. They were also very supportive. I think they gave me boundaries. I think even, growing up in the 80s and 90s, they were definitely stricter than I think parents are today. And even as a kid, I felt like there was a lot of restrictions, but they were really great about kind of giving me that space. And my father and mother, when I was in my, early teen years, got involved in network marketing. So I was also around a lot of that, Zig Ziglar, Les Brown, that positive mindset thinking. It kind of changed the way I saw a lot of things as well. So it was a great family to grow up in. I really am proud of it.
For those of you who are listening who are millennials or maybe Gen Z, for us Gen Xers, I mean, it really was a terrifying prospect that you might get failed, like that you might fail your grade, because it was, I mean, think of like what exists like that today. Like you, in a sense, you would lose your friendship group. You would, it's so public. Everyone would know like you failed. I remember in fifth grade, I remember that this kid, like he found out he's failed because they hand out the report cards on the last day of school. And then he opens it up and it says that he failed the grade. Like you're just left to your own to digest this. And I remember when I was in fourth grade, I was in danger of failing because I just started being unmotivated, and the teacher had said to me, like, you might fail. And that scared me so much, right? That fear that I kicked in and made sure I didn't fail.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, when that happens to people, that sticks with them for a long time.
Sure. And it was living under that curtain. And it's funny because, like you said, growing up, as Gen X, there was no, like, if you didn't go to college, you were a failure. That was the moniker. And I think it was because our parents' generation, the baby boomers, a lot of them didn't go to college and weren't able to achieve the level of success. And that was always, I think, painted as the key to success. Not that it's not. I mean, I went to college. I ended up getting a master's degree, which is ironic. But we always had that cloud hanging overhead. I've said to my kids ever since they were little, and they've, I've never hid that I failed first grade. They've known since they were in, probably preschool, kindergarten. So when they all passed first grade, their thing has always been like, oh, we beat you, Dad. But I never put the pressure of school on them. And to this day, I'm like, you want to go to college? Go to college. You don't want to go, don't go. And of course, they're straight A, AP, and honors students, maybe because they don't have that pressure. I don't know. But yeah, it was a big pressure for us when we were younger.
I think it was Malcolm Gladwell and he was talking about how it's better to be the top of your class in some lesser known college than to be like bottom of your class at Harvard,
Yeah.
right? The impact that has on you. So let's talk a little bit about failure and how it works for our benefit. How have you seen that? Because you work with a lot of business owners, right?
Yeah.
And let's talk about that. How does failure actually help us?
And I think failure is like anything else in the world, right? It could be good and it could be bad, right? And we hear a lot of people saying fail fast, fail forward, learn from your mistakes. I mean, it's one of those things where I think initially I always took failure as you were doing something wrong, right? Like you failed the class, to your point, you got punished. Um, I think the benefit of failure, though, was I never was pressured by perfection, right? So I was okay with failing as I started to get into my business and entrepreneurial career. I was okay with that. And when I work with entrepreneurs, I think the entrepreneurs I work with that do best, they fall into two categories. The latter of it is that they're the ones where like failure happens or something goes wrong and there's panic sets in. What are we going to do? They overcorrect, right? All right, whatever it takes to make the client happy. We're gonna discount their invoice this month. We're gonna do whatever we need to do, and that's okay. I don't think that's wrong. But they overcorrect and they overgo into almost panic state, right, to try to save the relationship, right? And I've seen people do this in business, in marriage, and raising kids. They overcorrect, right? I've seen people even do it in their own life, not to get too into it, but I always kid around like when people are doing like, oh, I'm doing dry January and never drink. It's an overcorrection usually, right? Because they've gone too far into the other realm. The flip side of that, though, is the entrepreneurs I work with that really I see grow and scale are the ones that can take failure and be like, okay, this happened. Why did it happen? And what do we need to do to grow from it, right? It's a big difference in that calm approach to failure than the panicked approach to failure. I think the third category, which we really shouldn't even talk about, is the people that ignore failure, though, right? Because there's plenty of people that keep failing and just ignore it and keep going. They're just doomed to fail, right? But the successful entrepreneurs usually approach it in one of the two ways I spoke of. You just have to decide which one's better for you. I kind of like the calmer approach. In my tactic, I try to lead people to that level. But I think those are really the three areas. The third area, if you go into full, or if you're ignoring failure, you're destined to just go deeper into it.
Well, speaking to the first group about the people running around with their hair on fire, it doesn't do a lot to inspire confidence in your team. And that's what gets your team on the internet looking for new jobs. Yeah. Let's talk about the second group, though, those that are calm through failure. Why are they like that? Did they grow to become like that? Like in your experience working with people, how does somebody get to that place where failure is a place of learning, that they're not freaked out by it?
I think it's a growth thing, right? I think it's harder. I will say I think it's harder to do when you're younger, I think it's something you have to mature and grow into or experience a lot of, right? And it depends on your life circumstances too. We talked about earlier, I have a great family. I have things. Maybe people have dealt with things in their life that it's like, well, if something's going wrong in my business and, my family's healthy or, I saw my mom die in my arms, like they're not as worried about, about those things. And sometimes it's about perspective. I have one client, that I work with, Hardcore Italians, and Mike Ficara is the CEO. And he always says, he's like, any problem that comes up, my grandparents migrated here from Italy with nothing. And how to build a life from nothing, not speaking English, not knowing how to do anything. So if my ads aren't working right, or something goes wrong, or we got the wrong shipment to the warehouse, like I could solve those problems. Like my grandparents solved the problems of having nothing and coming to a new country. There's nothing I can't do in my business. So I think it's perspective and balancing too, right? But I think it's definitely at the end of the day a personality trait. I mean, I think is it something you can learn to do? Yes, but I think it's a personality trait that most people have in who they are, and I think it's something that could definitely be learned and controlled, but I think it has to be innate in us as well. I think people have to have that calm personality about them, or they say it's always the quiet ones. These will be sometimes my entrepreneurs that I work with that are a little bit quieter in the room and not as boastful and not as always feeling the need to talk. It's usually the quiet ones.
To your point about perspective, I think that's so important, and that often comes with time and experience, often age. And I think this is, for anyone who's listening and you are a younger business owner or you're younger in your career, this is one of the reasons why it's great to have older people in your life as mentors. You may know way more about them from a tech side or about AI or whatever it might be, but there's so much about business that's about pushing through challenges over, like it's an inner game. And older people in your life they've usually gone through stuff and they can give you perspective. I have a close friend, but also a mentor in my life, and he's 15 years older than I am. We talk regularly, and he will say things to me like, hey, you may not like what I'm about to say. And I'm like, no, say it. But he'll give me perspective that only someone who's further down the road can give. And so even though I know more about my business, obviously, than he does, he just has more years in life, and there's wisdom in that.
Yeah, yeah. I was at an event yesterday of a group I'm a part of, a networking group, and the guy that runs it was speaking. And he basically said that he says, get a board of directors for your life, and pick maybe 3 or 4 people and try to take them out to dinner once or twice a year and let them call you out on your BS, right? Because that's where the real growth happens. And like, hey, and it's perspective, right? It's looking back, and I think it's. And I think but the question comes from then, how do you qualify that mentor, right? How do you qualify who that mentor is going to be? Because there's plenty of people that are older than you that have kind of just punched their ticket and will give you advice because they feel like they're older, right? And we all got them, the uncle, the aunt, the friend, that's like, well, I've been around for 70 years and I know this now. No, you just survived 70 years, right? It's qualifying the people, I think, too, that have the life that you want, or that have done the things that you want, and or not, right? Because sometimes you could learn from people that have done things wrong. But I think when you look at that board of directors, or to your point, the mentors that are going to give you the right direction, it has to be people that, and like I said, sometimes it's that quality of the quiet ones. I think a lot of times we want to look for the loud and the boastful person, and the guy that's always out there yelling and saying the things in the room. And like, yes, in today's internet clickbait society, that's good. But if you really want that true mentorship, sometimes it's the quiet ones, or it's the older guys. I mean, you look at Warren Buffett, like he still goes to McDonald's every morning, still drives the same old Cadillac, richest guy in the world. Why? Because he's one of the quiet ones, but he's also one of the smartest ones. So when you're looking for those mentors too, I always say, don't let age be the only qualifier, but look for the other traits that you want as well. Because I've seen too plenty of older people take advantage of younger people, and I've seen them kind of go in there and be like, oh no, I'm the gray hair, I'll take care of you, I'll make sure it goes right, and they don't always do that.
Yeah, I had one. To your point, I think mentors have to be invited in.
Yeah.
And I had one time I had a gentleman who was successful, and we were having coffee, but he was, in a sense, trying to insert himself into my life as my mentor. And that just turned me off right away, whether that's my ego or whatever it was at the time. Of course, there's things I could learn from him. But at the same time, I don't want the mentor that takes that approach with me right from the beginning,
Sure.
sort of setting himself up as a father figure. Because in my mind, I'm like, I don't need a father figure right now. I just need to grow my business.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really a form of listening too, right? I think too, you can find those mentors quick. Like I said, I was at a networking event yesterday and talking to someone and just asked the right questions and got the mentorship I needed, micro mentorship, right? It's hearing those things, and I think too, it's a matter of being out in those places as well. It's hard. Networking to me is so important. I think so many people take for granted getting into the rooms for the hustle and grind, right? Like, oh no, well, like I'd love to go to that networking event, but every time I go there, I never get, I didn't get any leads from it. Okay. But leads isn't always the most important thing, or I didn't get any business. You never know who's going to be in the room. You never know who you're going to talk to. I can't tell you how many clients I've gotten because of an event I went to and, kept going. They followed me on social media. They saw my posts, and 2-3 years later sometimes. Oh, hey, I just talked to my friend and I think they need what you do. I'm not sure what you do. Like a lot of people, they follow me on social media. They're like, Mike, I know you smoke cigars and eat steak, and I know you do something with business. I don't know what it is, but I feel like you should talk to my friend. That's how the majority of my leads come in, not because I go to these events and do these things and give people my business card and say, here's what I do. I barely tell anyone what I do at a networking event, but I ask a lot of questions. What do you do? Oh, that's interesting. How'd you get into that? Where did that come from? Why did you do that? And then when I leave, they don't know that much about me, but we connected. But I'll always get a text message or an email saying, it was great to connect with you. I can't wait to talk more and figure out what you do. I almost leave them hanging, but I know I ask them so many questions that they feel that much more comfortable with me. And that's really the goal. But that's how you grow your business. That's how you grow your network. To your point, that's how you bring those mentors in that can be invited in and qualify them well.
I love the point the speaker made about having a personal board of directors.
Yeah, yeah. Steve
And
Middleberg. It was a great quote.
yeah, it makes me think. I mean, if you're listening right now, if you were going to create a board of directors, 3 or 4 people for your life, who would be in that? And maybe just as important, who would not be
Yeah.
in that? Mike, who would you bring in? Let's say you could bring in anyone as your personal board of directors. Who would you invite?
I mean, I think if I had to pick the top three, right? I think it's important once again to qualify that. I always say the first one would be my dad. My dad and I, he kind of is on that board, and we get together once a month or once a week actually, and have lunch. And just talk, and we used to share an office, and my dad's really someone that can give me good balanced perspective, right? And that's always true with the parent. He's always very good at balancing that mentor versus parenting. The second one would be the guy I just mentioned, Steve Noodleberg, who gave that advice to the board. I think he's just a great guy. He also has his 2 sons that joined his company recently in the last 4 or 5 years. And he does a lot of coaching and mentoring, and they just have a great program. The Noodleberg family is just excellent. I admire that as a father of 3 sons, and I have a daughter as well. But just that idea of working with family, I think it's something that I'm impressed with. The fourth one, or the third one, I would have to say if it's like my long shot wish list, and I've always said this, I'm not a political guy. But I think you and I even talked about this before we came on air. But George W. Bush, if I could get him W on there, because one of the things I love about him is he really went through a rough presidency. I think he was poked fun at a lot. A lot of people didn't like him. Like, he seemed almost dumb-witted in a sense. But as he's come into like his post-presidential career, and we even look at Jimmy Carter just passing away, what he's done with that, and just the way, you see how close him and Michelle Obama are, and the different ways he's in, and he always maintained that happiness. And I feel like if you see an interview with him today, he's still happy. And he did that. How did you go through all that public scrutiny? How did you go through all those people just despising you? How did you go through all that? I would love to pick his brain on how he kept his level of happiness. You even look at the president's age. I say he's one of the ones that probably looks the best. And listen, maybe that's ignorance is bliss, whatever it may be, but he's one of those guys where, man, if I could just have lunch with him once, that would be the coolest thing ever,
I have noted it's been impressive how, to me, it's been impressive how he is, once he left. Like, people have tried to pull him back in with his opinions on stuff, and he just has refused to weigh in on that for whatever reason. But
yeah, he went and really enjoyed life, and when you think about it, I mean, being president is probably the ultimate thing you could do in his career field, right? What are you going to do after that, to your point, but it's really, how did you move into happiness? Because I think too, and even my father being one of my mentors and having lunch with him every Tuesday, and he still works, you don't necessarily have to, but he still does because he loves it. He's working from home now. Obviously things are a little scaled back, but and that's what brings him happiness. But, and I think I'm kind of the same ilk, but then how do you disconnect and maybe not really work and keep yourself focused? Like, even over this Christmas break, man, I got bored out of my mind. I was like, all right. And, like every day I went and did a little something because I couldn't not, even though a lot of my clients were kind of shut down and doing different things, I still wanted to do something, so I think it's that work-life balance, which I kid around doesn't really exist at all, but I'd love to learn more. I think that group would help me learn all the things I need,
For sure. Let's talk a little bit about fear, because fear is something that I think a lot of people, well, everybody feels. There are people listening right now that are working a job and maybe they feel like they should go for a promotion, but they're afraid to have that conversation. There's a lot of business owners that just live in fear all the time. That's not necessarily bad to have some fear in your life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Fear, what role does it play for an entrepreneur? When is it good and when is it costly?
Sure. And, my father, once again, I mentioned my father being one of my mentors. One of my favorite things he used to say as a kid, and of course, if my dad said it, I thought he actually created it, but he always used to say, fear was false evidence appearing real. And anytime I was scared, that's what he would tell me. Now, a couple of times when I was up, on a high place or scared of heights or claustrophobic, I'm like, this seems pretty real. But I think fear is one of those things that we have to be living in, and I believe in living in somewhat of a constant state of fear. And you kind of alluded to it earlier. Well, what if something goes wrong in the business, right? The fear most people have when something goes wrong or there's a failure failure almost immediately leads to fear. Well, what's the fear? We're going to lose the client, or we're going to lose money, or we're going to lose this. Like, the fear is not in the initial problem that happened. The fear is always in the longer term impact, I think, in business. I think, first of all, and I mentioned heights. Like, how do you know you're afraid of heights until you get to the top of the building, right? Like, how do you know you're afraid of heights till you get to the top of the mountain? You don't know, right? But what happens when you're there and you realize you're scared? You got to figure out how to get back down, right? To get back to where it's safe. So I think fear puts us into an automatic state of learning and an automatic state of understanding, which I think we need to be in. And I think we need to use fear as fuel, right? A lot of times we use fear, though, to maybe get off the mountaintop. Maybe we should stay there a little bit longer and figure it out and get comfortable with it and learn. I always say, and, fear is kind of like a roller coaster, right? Why do people go on roller coasters? It's not because they're fun. It's not because they're efficient. It's literally because they want to experience 5 minutes of fear, right? Because there's a certain joy in that fear. And then what do they always say? Oh, that was awesome, or what happened? Or then, you tell your friends, oh, how was it when you went to Disney? Oh, it was great. I went on that new roller coaster, the new Tron. It was so, was it scary? Was it fast? Was it slow? Was it long? Fear leads us to have conversations too. So we need to use fear as kind of the fuel and learn how to experience it like the roller coaster, where we know how to go into it, we experience it fast, we get through it, we realize it's not as bad as we think it is, and then we need to go about and we need to use that in our business or for different lessons. Because if we don't use fear as fuel and we use fear as that, panic, if you will, we don't win. But if we use it as fuel, and the entrepreneurs, like I said, I don't think anyone's not scared, right? You're always in a constant state of fear. I just spent $30,000 this month on ads. I'm scared whether or not it's going to make money, but I still did it, right? You can't act in the fear. If you say I spent $30,000 this month and I'm not going to do that next month because we didn't make as much as we thought, instead of saying, hey, let me figure out what I did right, figure out what I did wrong, that fear has to be fuel.
I say something similar about disappointment, and especially when I'm talking to leaders or leaders in the corporate sector, in that leaders need to carry with them just a sense of disappointment always. That sounds so depressing, but it's not meant in that way. You don't have to be sad and to be disappointed, but the disappointment comes from standards, right? Disappointment comes from something can be better. Like, if you can't have a lens of disappointment through looking at certain things, then it shows you that your standards are probably not high enough. You probably don't believe in the potential of yourself and your team, because who's operating at full potential? Nobody, right? Which is where there's always a gap to close. I think somewhere along the way we've been sold this idea that life should be easy and that life should always be filled with happiness. And I think those two things are almost like prison sentences.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's the people who look for that, right, that aren't happy, If you ever watch it, speaking of prison, though, you ever watch, some of those prison shows, I've gone down that rabbit hole late night, I remember Locked Up, I think was one from a while ago, and you had a lot of different people in there, right? You had people that were angry, that hated being there, but then you also had people that were like, man, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm in here for the rest of my life, but it got me off the streets, it got me out of trouble, I found God, blah, blah, blah. They found the happiness in their prison, right? And I think, to your point, it's learning how to be happy in that prison. And it's like, I tell everybody, like, every year should be your best year ever. Not because all this good stuff happens, but because you don't, like bad stuff's going to happen. People are going to die. You're going to get hurt. You're going to succeed. You're going to fail. But, like, man, like, you made it through another year. You're growing. You have a whole new 365 set of experiences, whether you remember them or not, that happened to you. Like, there's growth that's happening there. That's the best year of your life. And, it's funny because pretty sure my wife won't listen to this, but any of us that are married or you have a girlfriend, like, you take a picture with your wife or your girlfriend on your phone now, what's the first thing they ask, James?
Where are you going to post that?
Yeah, and let me see it. Let me see it. Let me approve it. Where are you going to post it? Let me look at it, right? They want to see how they look in it, right? But inevitably, I got an app on my phone. It's called Time Hop, and it goes back to, like, every year. It shows you pictures and things you do. I'll show my wife a picture from 5-6 years ago or even a year ago, and she's like, oh, man, I really look good in that picture. And then I'm like, yeah, you know how many times you made me take that? Like, and that was like the one she didn't like, right? That's the one she didn't want to post. Like, so I think it's the perspective of, we always think it doesn't look as good, or we always think we don't look as good. We're better than we realize. And keep in mind, and I do a little exercise every morning when I wake up, is I go back to, so I'm 44, right? So I have like 3 little things I write in a spreadsheet. It's 34, 24, 14, and 4. And I put, what would that version of me be proud of to see me at with today? right? What would they be shocked with? Would they be amazed with? So what would 34-year-old me be impressed with? What would 24-year-old me be impressed with? What would 14-year-old me be impressed with? What would 4-year-old me be impressed with, right? And sometimes the simple is like 4-year-old me would be excited that I could play video games anytime I want, 14-year-old me probably wouldn't believe that I'm married to such a beautiful woman and have a beautiful home and 4 kids. But that perspective for me has really helped me kind of put into line to your point, like what's the disappointment, what's the failures. It's like, man, like I'm further along than I probably ever thought I would be, so why am I getting frustrated? Not to say I don't, but why am I getting frustrated?
That's a great perspective, by the way, looking at the past. I've never done that before, but I'm going to try that out. I will often look ahead and think, what would 65-year-old version of me come and say to me right now? And it's actually quite profound. At least I've experienced that a lot of times when I ask that question, I'll just get this great answer of wisdom that came from me. Yeah. Maybe it came from a parallel universe. Who knows?
Yeah. Future James, right?
Exactly. I want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurs and what makes them successful. Before we get to that, let's just talk a little bit about your transition. Before you were a fractional COO, you were a teacher. You were a teacher in like primary school, high school?
Yeah, I was a high school teacher actually. So the story, like I said, and obviously talking about being a failure in school. I didn't do well in elementary school, middle. I was in public school, and then I was getting into a lot of the wrong things as I went through my middle school career. I said I did what most people did wrong in their high school and college career. I did wrong in my middle school career. And my parents were like, "Yeah, you're going to Catholic school." And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me, man!" So they sent me to a private Catholic school, and I absolutely hated it. Same thing. Like I was like on an active mission to get kicked out, like failing. I didn't get into trouble as much as I was just like not trying academically, just because I figured you get in trouble. That was an immediate consequence. Back in the day, they didn't have online grades. You didn't do well in school. Your parents, every 9 weeks, your parents, didn't know what was going on. No, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So that was like my way out. But eventually I did fall in love with the Catholic school I was at. I got really involved in youth ministry there. And I still graduated with I think a 1.9, but I was also prom king. So there's the balance for you in sort of what my life was like. But I watched all my friends, to your earlier point, I watched all my friends go away to college. And I ended up staying home, going to community college and waiting tables. And long story short, while I was doing that, one of my former teachers came in and said, "Hey, do you want to substitute teach?" And I'm like, "That sounds great. I'd love that." At the time, I'd actually I transferred from community college to the 4-year university, failed out of that. And I fell in love with teaching and absolutely loved it. Went back, finished my degree. I got a major in psychology with a minor in theology, taught Bible and ethics for the better part of a decade. When I got my master's in educational technology, because that's when like iPads were first coming out, and I was doing podcasting and all this cool stuff in my classroom. And then my wife was pregnant with our second baby, and I was like, man, I think I got to like make more money. And the only way to do that in education is become an administrator. So I saw a job for an online curriculum specialist for a Catholic school. And I'm like, perfect. Just got my degree in educational technology. Sounds like a plan. Went and did that. Got the job. Turns out they were unknowingly running a startup out of that school. And they were trying to get investors into this learning management system they had. Well, they ended up, after the first year, we really kind of like, they kept chasing investment. They never got it, but we grew it to about 34 states. This guy by the name of Wayne Huizinga put a bunch of money into it, which you don't know who Wayne is. He's the guy that used to own Blockbuster Video, the Miami Dolphins, Florida Panthers, and Marlins. I think it was the first guy to ever own 3 professional teams in one city. He put a lot of money into the business. I was promised everything under the sun: stock options, equity, my own private plane. I got none of that. When they ended up selling the company, and I was about to go back to the classroom, my wife and her infinite knowledge came to me and said, "Wait a second, you worked really hard on business, and you just learned a lot from the guys that basically grew Blockbuster Video and all these other successful companies, Waste Management." She goes, "Why don't you help other people grow and scale their businesses, just like you did with this one, instead of going back to the classroom? You're going to put the same amount of effort into it." She goes, "Unless you want to do that." And I was like, "You know what? That's a good idea." So the second half of my career, now I always used to say for a good while there was pretty much half and half, but now I'm on about probably 13 years of doing this. I've just done that and started in the education space, but I worked with everybody from, oil and gas industry, manufacturing. I've got my own cigar company I launched. I do a lot in the cigar industry, so a little bit of everybody. So that's a very long story short. I talk about the details in my book, like Socks on a Rooster, but that's kind of the really long story short.
Let's see your book again. I love the title.
Yeah.
Like Socks on a Rooster. What's the concept behind it?
So once again, another homage to my father. When we were growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, and my dad, I think, just to make things feel fresh and new, would love to move furniture around. So he would, he was feng shui before it was, feng shui. So we'd always move everything around. If we got something in the right place, he would say like socks on a rooster. So of course, as a kid, once again, my dad was my hero, still is. I was like, oh, that's what that means. But then when I started teaching, and something would go good in the classroom, I'd say, or a kid would do good, I'd say like socks on a rooster, and they would look at me like I'm crazy, like, where are you from? Like, are you a redneck or something? Like where are you from? Like, no, I was born and raised here in Florida. And they're like, what does that mean? And I explained, they'll be like, we never heard that before. And the reason why I titled that book is first a nod to my father, but I think, the second line in the book is a guide to busting the entrepreneurial cliches that are holding you back. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs say things and do things that they don't realize why they're doing them or how to make them functional in their business. I was saying this thing because it's something my dad said, but I didn't really know how to apply it properly or where it belonged. And I think a lot of people say that your network is your net worth, right? And we were talking about some of the gurus before we came on air, right? There's plenty of people that I say your network is your network, yes, if you know how to leverage it properly. But a lot of people out there are just groupies. They're following the same people around, going to the same conferences month after month, year after year, and they're not really growing and they'll sit there and tell you, yeah, but my network's my network. I'm in the room with these millionaires and billionaires. It's like, are you really though? So I talk about how you bust the cliches and turn them into action. Not that they don't have true meaning behind them, but how do we turn them into actual action?
Love it. I grew up with a lot of those expressions, and one of them, my dad used to always say, you better get this done or you'll be SOL. And I didn't know what SOL meant. I just thought, oh, that's just what you say when there's going to be consequences. So when I was a young preacher, I was just hired with this church and a lot of older people in it, and I was leading this meeting, and I said, we got to make sure this gets done or we're going to be SOL. And then all these people like looked at me like I had just said something terrible. And I was like, what? And they're like, I can't believe you just said that. And I'm like, SOL? And then I realized like, I actually don't even know what this means. And then someone explained it like, that means shit out of luck. And
Yeah.
so that's just not cool in a church meeting from a young preacher. But anyways.
Oh, that's a great story.
When you work with entrepreneurs, especially those who maybe are solopreneurs or they only have a couple of staff, what are the most common problems you see that you help them with?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is they're doing too much, right? They just have too much on their plate. They're doing everything. They're one-arm paper hangers. And usually they started the business because they have one key skill, right? They were good at this, or they have one key mission or one key idea, but they're doing everything from the accounting to the payroll to running the ads to managing the social media page to creating the product or service, whatever it is. They're doing everything. And the biggest thing I come in is like, okay, we're gonna have you work less, and it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, well, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, and we need to hire people to do this, and we need to spend money. Like that's the first breakdown I do because that's the only way to grow. Right now, listen, there's plenty of people. I say it's pretty easy to make $1 million nowadays in a business, right? It's much harder to take that $1 million home. So you can bring $1 million into a business today pretty easily. But to be able, to bring that home, and most entrepreneurs I see they were doing one, maybe 2, 3, even 3 million, only taking home sometimes $50,000 to $60,000 a year. So the first thing we come in and do is, and that's the second thing really, is their finances. They're not managing their money properly. So how do we manage the money properly, at least get that to 6 figures, right? And then how do we take that money in your business now and reinvest it so you're doing less, so you can focus on the core thing that you can do so you can grow. And I will say, like I said, those are the two biggest things. It's usually their finances are a mess. They're paying too much in taxes. They're not doing the right things. I mean, you'd be surprised how many $3 to $5 million businesses I've walked into that are using like, oh, I just use TurboTax, and they're not they don't have an accountant. They don't have a CFO maybe, or somebody that's looking over their finances. It amazes me on those two ends. And then, like I said, the idea of doing too much, because we're in that hustle culture. Oh, you should be working more. You should do it. If you want to be successful, you should be doing this. Yes, but okay, that doesn't mean you should be doing everything. You want to work all the time? Great. Work at what you're best at. That's how you grow. But if you're just doing a bunch of little things you're really not good at, that's not how you're going to grow.
What would you, as we close out here, if you were going to give a final piece of advice to those who have small businesses, and what you're saying resonates with them? They're like, yeah, I am doing too much and my cash flow is all over the place. If you're going to say one thing to them, what would it be?
I mean, I think it would be find someone that can help you do less, find that, and really from the point of like, it maybe it's someone like me that's a fractional CEO that comes in and tells you how to do it, or I would say find someone that has the duplicate skills that you do, that you could start handing stuff off to them. That would be the thing, you know. So hire somebody that could do some of the things that you're doing, or multiple of the things that you're doing, because then that will allow you to focus on your business and grow. But you have to offboard work. That's just the bottom line. You have to offboard tasks. That's the first key to success.
Absolutely. So, Mike, for those listening, if they would like to get your help or find out more about you and your work, where should they go?
Yeah, just MikeFicara.com. So it's my name, MikeFicara.com. You can go there. That's also my handles on all social medias. You'll either see me in a picture with a cigar in my mouth or holding up my book. Those are my two profile pictures. So if you found that, that's how you found me. There may be some other Fugazis out there that are not Mike Ficara, but that's how they could get in touch with me.
Well, we'll definitely put all of that in the show notes, but I want to thank you for your time and being on the show. As a business owner myself, I know the challenges. It's such a strange world when you start your own business, because you usually start it, like no one told me I was going into sales when I decided to start my own business, right? And had they told me that, I would have maybe rethought the whole thing, said to learn along the way. It's a rough ride, but yet it's a thrilling ride. I just can't imagine anything else. So anyways, I appreciate what you do, that you help people really live out their dreams. So thank you for that. And thanks for being on the show today.
No, thanks for having me, James. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody listening.